Stop. Right now. Do nothing. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. Because everything you keep trying to fix is already fixing itself without you. What if your effort is the very thing blocking your peace? What if stepping back, just once, unlocks what force never could? Stay with me, because in the next few moments you may discover that the answers you've been chasing for years have been quietly waiting in your stillness. Stop scrolling now. Close your eyes for 10 seconds. Say nothing. Do nothing. Just observe. Then come back and tell me what changed. Stillness is often misunderstood, especially in a world that has spent decades equating movement with meaning. To be still is frequently mistaken for doing nothing, for giving up, for drifting into passivity. But this confusion hides a deeper reality, one that becomes clearer with age and lived experience. Stillness is not the absence of action. It is the absence of unnecessary interference. It is not emptiness, but alignment. There is a natural order within every human being, a quiet rhythm that does not depend on constant effort. You may have felt it at certain moments in your life, times when decisions seemed to arise on their own, when clarity appeared without struggle, when the next step became obvious without being forced. These moments are not accidents. They are glimpses of what happens when you are in alignment with something deeper than surface-level thinking. Most of our lives, however, are spent resisting this alignment. We try to manage every outcome, anticipate every possibility, and correct every uncertainty. The mind becomes restless, always reaching forward, always attempting to shape reality according to its fears and desires. In doing so, it creates a subtle tension, a friction between what is unfolding naturally and what we insist should happen. Stillness dissolves this friction. When you become still, not just physically but internally, you begin to withdraw that constant interference. It is like stepping back from a tangled knot instead of pulling at it blindly. In that space, something remarkable begins to occur. The parts of you that operate beneath conscious awareness, the deeper layers of memory, intuition, and experience, start to organize themselves. They do not require your force. They require your silence. This inner intelligence has always been present. It has guided you through countless moments without your awareness. It has shaped your instincts, informed your reactions, and quietly integrated the lessons of your life. But it speaks in subtle ways. It does not compete with the noise of constant thinking. When the mind is loud, this intelligence remains in the background. When the mind becomes still, it moves to the foreground. Alignment, then, is not something you create. It is something you allow. Consider how often overthinking has complicated simple situations. A decision that could have been clear becomes clouded by too many possibilities. A relationship that could have flowed naturally becomes strained by constant analysis. The more you try to control, the more distant the sense of clarity becomes. This is because alignment cannot be forced. It can only be uncovered. Stillness is the uncovering. It is the deliberate act of stepping out of the way so that what is already functioning within you can begin to take its proper place. This does not mean abandoning responsibility or withdrawing from life. On the contrary, it allows you to engage with life more effectively. Actions that arise from stillness carry a different quality. They are not rushed or reactive. They are precise, measured, and often surprisingly simple. There is also a profound sense of relief in this state. The burden of constant control begins to lift. You no longer feel compelled to solve everything immediately. You begin to trust that some processes require time, that some answers emerge only when given space. This trust is not naive. It is built from experience, from seeing how often clarity arrives when you stop chasing it. For those who have lived many years, this truth often reveals itself gradually. You begin to notice patterns. You see how certain struggles repeated themselves when approached with force, and how they resolved more easily when approached with patience. You recognize that life has its own way of arranging outcomes, often in ways you could not have planned. Stillness places you in harmony with this process. It is not about withdrawing from the world, but about meeting it without unnecessary resistance. It is about allowing your actions to arise from a place of inner coherence rather than outer pressure. In this way, stillness becomes a form of quiet participation, a way of engaging with life that is both gentle and deeply effective, and perhaps most importantly, stillness reconnects you with yourself. Beneath the noise of expectations, roles, and responsibilities, there is a core that remains unchanged. When you become still, even briefly, you begin to sense it again, a grounded presence, a calm awareness, a feeling that, despite everything, there is an order within you that has never been lost. To trust this order is to step into alignment, and from that alignment life begins to move, not with strain, but with a quiet, unmistakable flow. There is a subtle illusion that governs much of human behavior, the belief that the more tightly we hold onto something, the more secure it becomes. We apply this to our plans, our relationships, our identities, even to the outcomes we desire most. Control feels like protection, effort feels like certainty, and yet, over time, a different pattern begins to reveal itself. The harder we grip, the more resistance we encounter. This resistance does not always appear dramatically. Sometimes it is quiet, a sense of fatigue, a lingering dissatisfaction, a feeling that despite all effort, something is not quite moving. Other times it manifests more clearly as repeated obstacles, misunderstandings, or outcomes that seem to slip further away the more we pursue them. What we often fail to recognize is that this resistance is not always coming from the outside world. It is frequently generated within. When we try to control every detail, we create tension between what is and what we think should be. This tension becomes a kind of internal pressure. It narrows our perception, making us less able to see alternatives, less open to unexpected solutions, and more rigid in our responses. The mind, in its attempt to dominate the situation, loses its flexibility, and in losing flexibility, it loses effectiveness. Surrender, in this context, is often misunderstood. It is not defeat, it is not resignation, it is not a passive acceptance of whatever happens. Rather, it is a conscious decision to release the illusion that everything must be forced into place by will alone. It is an acknowledgement that there are forces at work beyond immediate awareness, processes that unfold in their own time, patterns that require space rather than pressure. When you surrender, you are not abandoning your intentions. You are loosening your grip on how those intentions must be fulfilled. This distinction is crucial, because when the grip loosens, something begins to shift. The tension that once dominated your thinking starts to dissolve. The mind, no longer fixated on controlling every outcome, regains a certain openness. In that openness, new possibilities appear. Possibilities that were always present, but previously obscured by insistence. Consider how often solutions come when you stop trying so hard to find them. You may have experienced this in simple ways. A forgotten name that suddenly returns when you stop searching for it. A problem that resolves itself after you step away from it. A conversation that becomes easier when you stop trying to direct it. These moments are small reflections of a larger principle, that forcing clarity often prevents it, while allowing space invites it. There is also a deeper psychological movement at play. Beneath conscious thought, there is a vast network of associations, memories, and insights that continues to operate regardless of your immediate attention. When you are constantly exerting control, you interrupt this process. You override it with urgency. But when you surrender, you allow this deeper system to function without interference. It begins to integrate, to connect, to resolve. This is why surrender often brings a sense of relief. It is not merely emotional, it is structural. You are no longer holding everything together through effort alone. You are allowing the natural processes within you to contribute. And as this happens, a different kind of movement emerges. It is not forced or hurried. It is quieter, but more precise. Actions taken from this state tend to be more effective, not because they are more intense, but because they are more aligned. They arise from a place that is not clouded by tension. At first, this can feel unfamiliar. There may be a lingering fear that if you let go, things will fall apart. This fear is understandable, especially if control has been a long-standing habit. But with time, you begin to observe something unexpected. Things do not collapse. In many cases, they begin to organize themselves in ways you could not have predicted. This does not mean that every outcome will match your expectations. Surrender does not guarantee a specific result. What it offers instead is a reduction of unnecessary struggle. It allows life to unfold with less resistance, making space for outcomes that are often more balanced, more sustainable, and more in tune with reality. There is also a quiet strength in this approach. It requires awareness to recognize when effort has become excessive. It requires discipline to step back when every instinct urges you to push forward. And it requires trust, not blind trust, but a grounded confidence that not everything depends on constant control. Over time, this way of being transforms your relationship with uncertainty. What once felt threatening begins to feel more neutral, even open. You realize that not knowing does not mean losing. It often means that something is still forming, still arranging itself beyond immediate view. In this sense, surrender is not an end. It is a shift, a movement from force to flow, from tension to responsiveness. It does not remove you from the process of life. It places you within it in a way that is less strained and more attuned. And in that attunement, resistance begins to fade. What once felt blocked starts to move. Not because you pushed harder, but because you finally stopped pushing against the natural course of things. In letting go, you do not lose control. You release the illusion of it. And in doing so, you gain something far more valuable, the ability to move with life rather than against it. There is a part of your mind that works tirelessly, silently, and with far greater depth than the surface thoughts you hear throughout the day. It does not speak in full sentences, nor does it argue or demand attention, yet it is always active, always observing, always processing. This is the layer of mind that continues long after conscious effort has reached its limits, the place where unresolved questions are held, where patterns are quietly recognized, and where solutions begin to take shape without force. Most people live almost entirely in their conscious thinking. They try to solve every problem through deliberate effort, analyzing, comparing, revisiting the same thoughts again and again. At first, this seems productive. It gives a sense of control, of involvement. But there comes a point where this process begins to circle itself. The same thoughts repeat, the same conclusions arise, and no real progress is made. It is here that frustration begins. Not because the problem is impossible, but because it is being approached from the wrong level of mind. The conscious mind is limited. It can focus on only a few elements at a time. It tends to rely on logic, on past experiences that are easily accessible, on patterns it already understands. This makes it useful for simple, immediate decisions. But when faced with complexity, especially emotional or deeply rooted issues, it often reaches a boundary it cannot cross. Beyond that boundary lies a different kind of intelligence. The unconscious mind does not operate in straight lines. It is not confined to step-by-step reasoning. Instead, it holds a vast network of memories, impressions, and associations, many of which are not immediately visible to awareness. It connects ideas that seem unrelated. It detects patterns beneath the surface, and it continues to work even when you are not actively thinking about the problem. You may have experienced this without fully recognizing it. A difficult situation lingers in your mind throughout the day, and despite your efforts, no clear answer appears. Then later, perhaps while resting, walking, or even waking from sleep, a sudden clarity emerges. The answer seems to arrive fully formed, as if it had been waiting just outside your awareness. This is not random. It is the result of a process that continued beneath the surface while you were no longer interfering. The unconscious mind requires space to function effectively. It cannot work freely when it is constantly overridden by conscious effort. When you insist on solving something immediately, you interrupt the deeper process. You replace it with urgency, with pressure, with repetition, and in doing so, you limit access to the very insight you are seeking. This is why stepping back is not avoidance, it is participation at a deeper level. When you release the need to control the solution, you allow the unconscious mind to engage fully. It begins to reorganize the elements of the problem, drawing from experiences you may have forgotten, emotions you have not fully examined, and connections that are not obvious at first glance. It works patiently, without strain, integrating pieces that the conscious mind cannot hold all at once. There is also a natural timing to this process. The unconscious mind does not respond well to demands. It cannot be rushed into clarity. It unfolds at its own pace, often revealing insights only when the conditions are right, when there is enough distance from the problem, enough quiet for deeper recognition to occur. For many, this requires a shift in trust. We are conditioned to believe that if we are not actively working on something, it is not being addressed. But this belief overlooks the continuous activity of the deeper mind. Even in moments of rest, something within you is still engaged. It is sorting, evaluating, adjusting. It is doing the work that conscious effort cannot complete. As you begin to recognize this, your relationship with problems begins to change. You no longer feel compelled to force an answer immediately. You become more comfortable, allowing questions to remain open for a time. This does not mean neglect. It means understanding that resolution is sometimes a process, not an instant event. And when the answer does arrive, it often carries a different quality. It is not forced or uncertain. It feels clear, almost self-evident. There is a sense that it fits, that it resolves more than just the surface issue. This is because it has emerged from a deeper integration, not just from logical analysis. Over time, learning to rely on this process brings a quiet confidence. You begin to trust that not every challenge requires immediate action. You recognize that stepping back can be as important as stepping forward, and you allow the deeper layers of your mind to contribute in the way they are naturally designed to do. This does not diminish the role of conscious thought. It refines it. The conscious mind becomes less strained, more focused, more receptive. It learns when to engage and when to step aside. In this balance, a different kind of clarity becomes possible. Not one that is forced into existence, but one that emerges, steadily, quietly, and with a depth that cannot be reached through effort alone. There is a kind of noise that most people never fully recognize because it is not external. It is not the sound of traffic, conversation, or technology. It is internal, continuous, subtle, and deeply woven into the way the mind operates. It is the noise of interpretation, reaction, anticipation, and constant mental commentary. This inner noise does not stop when the world becomes quiet. In fact, it often becomes more noticeable in silence when there is nothing external left to compete with it. This is why many people feel uncomfortable in true quietness. When external stimulation fades, the mind is left alone with its own activity. Thoughts begin to surface more clearly, not because they are new, but because they were always there beneath the surface. Memories, judgments, worries, unfinished emotions all begin to rise into awareness, and without distraction they appear more vivid. But what is often missed is that this mental activity is not always accurate reflection. Much of it is repetition. The mind replays familiar patterns, revisits old interpretations, and projects them onto the present moment. It creates a continuous layer of meaning over experience, even when no meaning is necessary. In doing so, it shapes how reality is perceived, often without permission. Silence disrupts this automatic process. When external noise fades and internal noise is no longer fed by reaction, something unexpected begins to happen. Perception becomes clearer, not because anything new is added, but because something unnecessary is removed. The constant overlay of interpretation begins to thin. What remains underneath is simpler, more direct, and often more truthful than what the mind usually constructs. In this state, patterns become visible that were previously hidden. You begin to notice how certain thoughts repeat themselves in cycles, how certain fears reappear in different forms, how certain assumptions quietly influence decisions without being questioned. These patterns are not always comfortable to see, but they are essential to recognize if clarity is to emerge. Silence does not create these patterns, it reveals them, and this revelation is the beginning of understanding. When the mind is constantly active, it tends to merge observation with interpretation. It does not simply see what is present, it immediately explains it, categorizes it, and attaches meaning to it. While this can be useful in daily functioning, it also creates distortion. The raw experience is filtered through layers of thought before it is fully understood. In silence, that filtering process weakens. There are moments when you may have experienced this without intentionally seeking it, perhaps during early morning hours or late at night when everything is still, or in brief pauses between tasks when no immediate demand is present. In those moments, there is often a sense that things feel slightly different, not because the world has changed, but because your perception of it has softened. This softness allows you to observe your own mental patterns more clearly. You begin to see how quickly the mind moves to judgment, how easily it fills gaps with assumptions, how often it projects past experiences onto present situations. These movements are usually so fast that they go unnoticed. Silence slows them down enough to be seen, and once seen, they begin to lose their automatic power. There is also a deeper layer to this process. Beneath the surface of mental noise lies something more stable, a form of awareness that does not react, interpret, or interfere. It simply observes. It is not influenced by the content of thought, but remains present as the background in which thought appears. As silence increases, this observing awareness becomes more noticeable. It is not something you create. It is something you uncover. It has always been there, but usually overshadowed by constant mental activity. When the noise decreases, this awareness naturally comes forward. It does not judge what it sees. It does not try to fix or alter it. It simply recognizes. This recognition brings a quiet form of clarity. You begin to realize that not every thought requires engagement. Not every feeling requires analysis. Not every internal movement needs to be followed. Some things can simply be observed and allowed to pass. This reduces inner tension significantly because much of that tension comes from over-involvement with mental activity. Silence teaches a different relationship with thought, not opposition, but distance, not suppression, but space. In that space, thoughts lose their urgency. They become events within awareness rather than commands that must be followed. As this understanding deepens, the mind becomes less crowded. There is more room between thoughts, more pauses, more stillness within activity, and in those pauses, a different kind of intelligence becomes accessible, one that is not driven by reaction, but by clarity. This is not a permanent state that must be forced. It is a natural consequence of allowing moments of true silence to exist without immediately filling them. Even brief periods of inner quiet can begin to shift perception over time. And gradually, something subtle changes. You begin to notice life more directly without as much distortion. You respond rather than react. You observe rather than interpret first. You experience moments as they are, not only as the mind describes them. In this way, silence becomes more than absence of sound. It becomes a tool of clarity, a way of seeing beyond the layers of mental construction, a return to a more direct relationship with reality, one that is quieter, clearer, and far more grounded than constant internal noise could ever allow.